Good morning, everybody. It's quite early here in Kentucky. It is almost 6, well, it's 6:37 a.m. I hope everybody's doing well on this Monday morning. Have I got news for you? Okay, the Brennan Center for Justice posted an article. It is called How Government Fusion Centers Violate Americans' Rights and How to Stop It. The Biden administration and Congress must impose oversight and accountability on the state-run centers. So let me show it to you here, folks. Okay, so I will read it and then post the link in the comments section. So this is actually dated December 15, 2022. I'm not sure why this wasn't all over the place. I just received it from a friend today. So let's read it here. It says, a federal jury awarded $300,000 this month to a Maine state police trooper who was demoted after blowing the whistle on privacy violations at the state's intelligence fusion centers. The federal government spurred the development of fusion centers after 9/11 as a means for sharing counterterrorism intelligence among state and local governments as well as select private entities. We all know what those private entities are, folks. The facts reveal during this trial adds to a mountain of evidence that fusion centers require greater regulation and oversight. The trooper alleged that the Maine Intelligence and Analysis Center, one in a network of 80 fusion centers operating across the country, was illegally collecting and sharing information about Maine residents who weren't suspected of criminal activity. They included gun purchasers, people protesting the construction of a new power transmission line, employees of a peace-building summer camp for teenagers, and even people who travel to New York City frequently. The whistleblower also claimed that Fusion Center supervisors pressured him to illegally share sensitive FBI information he had access to because of his position on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. As detailed in a new Brennan Center report, the whistleblower complaint was far from the first indication that fusion centers pose risks to American civil liberties and privacy rights. Civil liberties groups raised concerns as the network was being built without proper regulations or independent oversight. Leaked Fusion Center reports revealed improper monitoring of Muslim Americans and protesters from across the political spectrum, even as the centers expanded their missions beyond counterterrorism to, quote, all crimes, unquote, and, quote, all hazards, unquote. A 2012 investigation by the Senate Homeland Security and Government Affairs Committee found that fusion centers, quote, forwarded intelligence, unquote, of uneven quality, sometimes shoddy, rarely timely, and sometimes endangering citizens' civil liberties and Privacy Act protections, occasionally taking from already published public sources, and more often than not unrelated to terrorism. Significantly, the committee found fusion centers had failed to produce actionable counterterrorism intelligence. But the federal government continued to support fusion centers and implemented few reforms. Though fusion centers are operated by state and local governments, the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice provided funding, access to federal intelligence systems, and assigned personnel from the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, the DHS. Isn't that nice, folks? All with your tax dollars. I'm going to read that again. The federal government continued to support fusion centers and implemented few reforms. Though fusion centers are operated by state and local governments, that's right, your state, my state, your county, my county, your city, my city, the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice provided funding, access to federal intelligence systems, and assigned personnel from the FBI and Department of Homeland Security. Today, fusion centers are operating in every state in the union with little oversight and almost no public accountability. Indeed, federal auditors have complained that the very state governments administer DHS grant funds make it difficult to determine how much money fusion centers receive and how they use it. That's because they're not subject to FOIA requests, folks. Shortly after the Maine trooper filed his lawsuit in May 2020, a hack of fusion center contractors exposed 296 gigabytes of intelligence records from more than 200 law enforcement agencies, including the FBI and DHS. The record substantiated the troopers' complaints about privacy and civil rights violations at the Maine Fusion Center and showed similar abuse occurring throughout the network, particularly in tracking Black Lives Matter protests. The documents also showed that fusion centers had regularly spread misinformation sourced from dubious social media posts, including false reports alleging anti-fascists were starting wildfires or planning acts of violence. These specious reports distracted law enforcement during public safety emergencies. Well, folks, that is quite serious. The leak also revealed the inadequate vetting of contractors and private sector entities that participate in fusion centers, indicating that the network has become more of a security liability than a security solution. The participation of private sector entities in fusion center intelligence activities also raised concerns that these centers are serving private interests, yes, folks, rather than public safety. Local advocates from Maine, as well as Massachusetts, Texas, and California, have called for closing fusion centers. State and local representatives have the authority to determine whether the benefits of maintaining a fusion center are worth the costs. But the federal government also has an obligation to guard against the misuse of resources, systems, and personnel it provides. And it must ensure that Americans, sorry about that, folks, that's my alarm. The federal government also has an obligation to guard against the misuse of the resources, systems, and personnel it provides, and it must ensure that Americans' constitutional rights are not infringed upon by the improper collection, retention, and dissemination of personal, identifiable information of persons not reasonably suspected of criminal activity. Our reports recommend that the Secretary of Homeland Security take immediate action to ensure that the DHS grants to fusion centers are transparent and used for their intended counterterrorism purposes. We call upon the Secretary to require regular audits of fusion centers to ensure the data is protected against unauthorized disclosure and that the DHS resources are not used in violation of constitutional rights. We urge Congress to establish a special inspector general to audit the national network of fusion centers to detect waste, fraud, abuse, and illegality, and to use the results of this audit to establish a permanent, independent federal oversight body to ensure that future violations are discovered and remedied in a timely manner. These reforms are necessary to ensure that fusion centers' capabilities and resources are not abused and that Americans' rights to freedom of speech and association are preserved. Okay, that's the end of the article, folks. And this is written by Michael German, German, December 15, 2022. It is located on the Brennan Center for Justice website. I will post the link in the comments section. How government fusion centers violate Americans' rights and how to stop it. And one of the things that I remember is that the fusion centers are not subject to FOIA requests. I believe the Department of Homeland Security is, but not the fusion centers that run usually simultaneous with Homeland Security. I know here in Kentucky, the fusion center essentially runs with Homeland Security. It's not that way in every state. You'll have to check your state for where your fusion center is located and see if you can send them a Freedom of Information Act request. I don't believe you will be able to send it to them, as I believe that they are exempt from FOIA requests. But I look forward to your questions and comments down below. These fusion centers have to go. They are fusing information around the country on innocent people to use and distort. They are responsible for the defamation, libel, and slander campaign against you in the community. They are the ones that concoct the contrived narrative. And they send their fusion center agents out into the community wearing fake badges, claiming that they're fake agents, to co-opt your neighbors, the citizens' watch groups, and they spread this fake information about you. I moved to rural Kentucky, this location, knowing no one. But everybody knew everything about me. Actually, that was false. And you can see some of this information on this YouTube channel where my neighbors are spewing these allegations about me, and I'm thinking, where do they concoct this information from? Well, folks, they didn't get it on their own. These lies were spread throughout the community by someone. And that someone was sent to your local law enforcement, your local sheriff's department, to spread that information. So they were all co-opted. So I'm glad this is all being exposed. And at the same time, Targeted Justice filed their lawsuit. We will see. I'm looking forward to hearing what the response was to the lawsuit. And this is a very important article, folks. I look forward to your questions and comments. Thank you for subscribing. Welcome newcomers. And this is Lorraine, Alternative Homesteading, signing off for now.